Hello, this is a review of the 1976 film Foxtrot, directed by Arturo Ripstein. If you're looking for a review of the Foxtrot comic strip, or maybe the dance The Foxtrot, you've come to the wrong place. But if you're hoping to hear about sort of a quirky European film from the 70s with a great cast, then you're in the right place. So, like I said, Foxtrot has a really impressive cast. It's got Peter O'Toole, Max von Sydow, and Charlotte Rampling are all in it. It's directed by Arturo Ripstein, who I had never really heard of, but he's a somewhat famous Mexican director, has never had a huge, well-known film, but has had a number of sort of art house or somewhat relatively known under-the-radar films. I might cover some more of them in the future. This is one of his better-known works. This movie is also sort of vaguely associated with Roger Corman, because I think his company distributed it or something like that. But this movie has basically nothing to do with sort of a traditional Roger Corman film, and you probably shouldn't think about it in those terms, really. That all sounds pretty good, I guess, but the movie, pretty obscure and not that well regarded. So it has a rating of 5.8 out of 10 with 249 votes on IMDb. That includes my vote from just a couple of days ago. And it's got kind of a similar performance on Letterboxd and more or less wherever you look. Not a lot of people have seen this movie, and it's not super well regarded. So why the heck would I watch it and review it? Well, this is actually the beginning of a bit of a series of me trying to seek out movies exactly like this and watch them and figure out if there's any point in seeing them. And if there is, trying to be a bit of a guide and help other people get the best out of them. What I've found a lot is that a lot of these sort of niche movies are not bad, but having the right expectations and knowing what to look for in them and how to enjoy them is really important. And if you don't, then you probably won't enjoy it. So I just want to talk a little bit about this movie and some of its ups and some of its downs. Overall, I think it's a pretty interesting movie. I wouldn't say it's a great movie, but it's pretty interesting and maybe worth watching. So what is it? Well, it's a European movie about the European condition. And there were a lot of these sort of movies made in the 70s and earlier. Not so much of in fashion these days. But in some ways I would compare this movie to the movie The Damned, La Caduta degli Dei, or however you pronounce that. It sort of operates in a similar territory, but I'll tell you exactly what what that territory is. So this is kind of a historical movie. It's set in 1939, and it is inherently linked to the fall of Europe during World War II. But it's also kind of not a very historical movie because it takes place on an island, completely away from everything. The very beginning is on a boat, but then the boat arrives at the land, which is the island, and you spend the rest of the movie there. It's not really clear where this island is. It's surrounded by water. That's about all that they tell you, or how it's found or whatnot. But that's where the movie takes place. So the movie is mainly about a guy named Liviu, who is a member of the Romanian aristocracy. His second wife, Julia, that's Charlotte Rampling. Liviu is Peter O'Toole. And their escape from Europe to go live on this island to ride out the war, basically. They get to the island, and Larson, who's sort of an old wartime colleague of Liviu, is there sort of overseeing everything. That's Max von Sydow. And there's an assistant there named Eusebio, played by Jorge Luke, not to be confused with the creator of the Star Wars franchise or the Hungarian Marxist esthetician. But he plays sort of this, the help on the island, the servant, basically. Eusebio is a Portuguese name. Jorge Luke is a Mexican actor, and I suspect that it's not a coincidence that he's kind of invoking a non-European perspective. It's also not a coincidence that there are people from sort of the various social classes show up on this island, right? So we have a bit of a microcosm of European society. Like I said, it is a movie about the European condition, mainly sort of the fall of the aristocracy, but also all the other people sort of around. So they've got Larson, the sort of middle class, sort of professional former military person, and they also have Eusebio, who's the working class foreigner, basically. So the movie gets off kind of to a rough start if you're looking at how conventional movies should be. The beginning is sort of full of a lot of sort of very contrived characterization. Events happening for sort of inexplicable reasons, just sort of to characterize the movie. Ham-fisted is the main word I'd use to describe it. And unfortunately, despite them ramming all of these sort of character-building moments into your face, you still don't really get a sense of who the heck anyone is, and everyone feels really distant. This is a classic sign of not a very good movie. But I will say that the vibes of this part of the movie are actually pretty spot on, as in Liviu being haunted by the fall of the aristocracy, right? This idea, the island existing out of place and out of time, and him being out of touch with Europe, feeling like Europe is gone, like it's slipping, and like this is the last bastion of something, right? That kind of vibe is actually pretty spot on for this part of the movie. There's one of the interesting things about the island is that they set up a series of tents in the island to live in, which is really interesting, sort of Art Deco styling, really elaborate sort of like caravan setup. They've got a portable aristocracy, basically, that they take out to the island. And that idea, I think, is pretty interesting. The idea that he's trying to sort of keep things together and hold on while the world has crumbled in Europe. And this is, like I said, the last bastion. That part actually more or less rings true. Not that I was there, not that I'm from Europe or was alive during World War II, but that does make a coherent intellectual thrust for the movie, even if the characterization and sort of the more conventional things in the beginning of the movie don't really work out. The idea of the portable aristocracy does work more or less in the beginning. So, like I said, not a totally worthless movie in the beginning. I was just checking my notes over there, but there's a couple of scenes in this stage that I think are particularly interesting. One of them is a palm reading moment when Liviu and Larson are out playing in the waves. There's a lot of beaches on this island, not totally surrounded by them, but maybe. And while this is happening, Julia, who's sitting up on the beach, has an interesting moment with Eusebio where she goes to read his palm. And first, this involves taking off the glove because as he's dressed as a servant, he has all of his skin covered and whatnot. She offers him some lemonade, which he is very hesitant to take. And she then proceeds to read his palm, and she tells him, "Oh, you're going to get married soon and have kids." This is kind of an interesting scene, and not a bad scene at all. I think this is a pretty interesting moment. You're seeing a very sort of awkward and weird interaction that's happening across this class line between the aristocracy. And in particular, Julia, who's not born into the aristocracy or something, but I think was some sort of singer or something like that, who then marries Liviu and maybe feels a different sort of pressure to play the part. Well, she's having a sort of a charitable interaction with the help, so to speak, but it's just extremely odd in that her prediction, for one, is totally impossible. They're stranded out on this island. It seems very unlikely that Eusebio would find anyone to marry and have kids. The prediction just seems totally naive and out of place. And that, I think, is intentional because, like I said, microcosm of the different classes in Europe at the time. And that seems to show the disconnect between the aristocracy and the working class. Now, I will say that Julia's character is a little bit confounding in the beginning. And a lot of the characters have a similar thing where it's not really clear if you're supposed to be sympathetic for any of them, if you're supposed to be on their side, if you're supposed to like any of the characters. For instance, here you see Julia making sort of a kind gesture to Eusebio. Earlier, she lectures him for growing a mustache, right? Which is sort of in the opposite tack. I think overall, the point is that while Julia is very stylish and has a nice wardrobe, she's not exactly that nice, and doesn't understand how to reach across the social divide exactly. Now, it's sort of interesting when you look at Larson, who is also not really on equal footing with Liviu, but is a friend of Liviu. They have an interesting relationship, Liviu and Larson. And I think this is summed up in a scene that comes slightly later, which is the best scene in the movie, in my opinion, where, unfortunately, it's about 30 seconds long, is the best part. But there's a race that goes on the island that Liviu and Julia challenge each other with. It's not people racing, but crabs that they found. And the crabs are named. Julia's crab is named Eusebio, and Larson's crab is named, or Livyu's crab is named Larson, right? And so you really get the sense there that they're pitting the sort of proletarian working class, average Joes, average Jorges, against each other, right? The fraught class dynamic there, as they both are racing their crabs against each other. These crabs, inherently spiky, clawy creatures. Interesting scene, and that, in a lot of ways, sums up one of the big thrusts of the movie, which is the microcosm of European class structure with the racing of the crabs. And like I said, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good part. The movie, while it may not be like that great or coherent in a traditional sense, it does have, like I said, some coherent intellectual thrusts. These are some of them. Right. Once we're sort of through the beginning of the movie, we've done some sort of ham-fisted characterization, but still don't really understand who the heck anyone is or what's going on or why they're out here. But we do get the vibes of, the crumbling of society, the fraught links between the different parties. A kind of weird thing happens where they are visited on the island by a black ship, a sailing yacht, huge ship, with some other sort of European aristocrats. This portion of the movie doesn't really make any sense, to be honest, and all of the characters kind of look the same, which makes it very hard to sort of tell who's who, what's going on, and things like that. But it does put into focus one other nice part, which I think is sort of the politics of luxury, right? And this is kind of, you can sort of see this from the beginning, because like I said, they've set up these tents and these palaces. They have the portable aristocracy. Well, there are costs to that, right? It takes a lot of labor to be able to have like your Art Deco lifestyle and your fancy food and your fancy wine and your dance parties out on this deserted island with nothing there. And this really comes into focus when they're visited by, not really clear who the heck these people are, but some other aristocrats that they already know from somehow, who somehow found out where the island was and decided to come there for some reason. This brings into focus this idea of the politics of luxury. What are the costs of this, and who gets to participate in these sort of things? How is it decided that some people will, be privy to the resources and other people will be in charge of generating them and whatnot? Then this part sort of comes to a close, even less coherently than it began. They leave on the black ship, and then I won't spoil sort of what happens, but the movie kind of abruptly shifts after this into a very different tone. And I won't go into exactly what happens, but suffice to say, they find a way to put a lot more stress on the relationship of all the characters with each other, and particularly on the parties with each other. There's more constraints on resources. Now, again, it doesn't really make sense why this shift is so abrupt, and a lot of things in the movie don't really make any sense in the conventional way, but it does sort of start turning the screws on the microcosm of Europe and whatnot. And in the final bit, we also get another nice look at the plot, because we get to see that not only are we sort of seeing all of this as as sort of a movie about society, right, and class and things like that, but the last part, and maybe this is here all along for some people, but the last part to me also drove home a sort of personal, a more personal aspect of it, which is that Livio himself seeks isolation to some extent, right? Why have they come out to this island? Why are they distancing themselves from anyone? He is driven towards isolation for one reason or another, and they're sort of putting that, it seems like the movie is sort of suggesting that as a characteristic of the aristocracy, is that it is certainly in some ways kind of insipid, sinister, but unfair, political at the very least, but that also it is isolating, right? And that there's some sort of self-destruction baked into Livio, some sort of desire for him to want to leave, want to be out on this island, want to be nowhere, not to take place in all the labor that involves producing his role as a count or whatever he is. So that's kind of interesting. Now, the actual plot of the end of the movie is, I won't go into it, but kind of worthless from my point of view. I'm not really sure. It's sort of the similar plot that you'd find in like a 60s television show or something like that, and not a particularly strong episode either, or a giallo film from Italy or something like that. So it's sort of a weak conclusion on the surface of things, but like I said, turns the screw on some of the intellectual ideas of the movie, which are there throughout. So I guess overall, I would say not a great movie, but I hope that my reading of it gives some sort of roadmap for if you do find yourself having to watch this movie or wanting to, you have some sense of one way to approach it and whatnot. There is some intellectual content. It does seem like this is probably the point of the movie, what Ripstein is trying to do. I mean, it's not to say this is the only way to see it, but there is intention there and whatnot. And I do give kudos to the movie and to the time in particular, where a lot of movies like this were made, that it is not, that it is unconventional, basically, and that it is taking on serious and important ideas in sort of an interesting and kind of experimental way, with an interesting style. I will also say that I think the script of the movie is not bad, not in the sense that it makes sense logically, but in that it has some nice lines here and there, has some nice writing. It's pretty monologue-y, so they give characters big chances to explain kind of big ideas, which sometimes sort of come off. Sort of fails in terms of characterization, sort of fails in terms of really making sense, but there are some interesting ideas here. Hopefully that can give you some sense of this movie, and maybe you'd like to watch it, or maybe not. I'm going to do, like I said, this is the beginning of a series of similar reviews of somewhat similar movies, although not all from the same time or place, but movies that I think you benefit from having a guide. If you have any ideas for those, let me know. I've got a huge list, but I could always use more that I might get to one of these days. And I guess, if you're interested, just stay tuned, because I will be posting some more similar reviews of somewhat similar movies. But that was Foxtrot, 1976, directed by Arturo Ripstein. Kind of an interesting movie, maybe worth your time. Might check it out. Good luck finding a copy, but maybe worth your time.